Om Namah Shivaya. If you brought a copy of Ribhu Gita with you this evening, we'll take up on chapter 3, verse 42. Ribhu continues to instruct Nadaga in the nature of the self, the one reality. And he says, whatever, and however much, whatever, and whenever seen, is consciousness. Whatever and however much is far out of reach is only consciousness. The term seen in the first sentence should be understood as experience or knowledge. So whatever is known, whatever is experienced, is only consciousness. Whatever, be it a thing or a circumstance, whatever, be it large or small, whatever, be it apparently subjective or objective, its nature is only consciousness. Not that consciousness becomes that thing, however much, a lot or a little, but precisely where, in delusion, a thing is supposedly perceived, of whatever kind, be it atomic or galactic, right there is actually only consciousness. Consciousness is formless. It is undifferentiated. It is indivisible. Whatever and however much, whatever and whenever seen, is consciousness. Whether seen while alive or seen after death, it is only consciousness. Whether seen while awake, seen while dreaming, or seen while in deep sleep, whatever it is, however much it is, be it the profusion and extension that we see in the waking state, or the apparent nothingness or absence in deep sleep, whatever and however much, and whenever seen, it is only consciousness. Whether seen in the past, seen in the future, seen in the present, whatever it is, however much it is only consciousness. You experience yourself only at all times. Consciousness is your real nature. It is your essential being. Unborn, indestructible, limitless, without any difference in it, is the nature of consciousness. The consciousness is your being. You don't have another kind of being. It is the only self that there truly is. And all that is apparently ever experienced, however much, at whatever time, in whatever way, it is just yourself. Not yourself in terms of a body, not yourself in terms of a mind or a supposed individual, but as your actual existence, which is pure consciousness. It is all yourself. You have never been involved with another. You've never experienced anything other than your own consciousness. The idea that you do experience something else is illusion. It is ignorance. And that ignorance rests on the primary misconception, the false assumption of a separate individual, an I, to be the experiencer of all these things. When we inquire, as the Maharshi has instructed, to know the nature of that I, we find it is only consciousness, unembodied, non-individualized consciousness. Then everything we thought we experienced before turns out not to be the case at all. The only thing that was there, always, was and is consciousness. So he says, whatever and however much, whatever and whenever seen, is consciousness. Whatever and however much is far out of reach is only consciousness. Consider far out of reach to mean unknown, not experienced, or not yet experienced. Everything that you experience, he has established as being of the nature of consciousness. And if you conceive of something beyond your experience, that also is within and of the nature of consciousness.
Would the meditation be if in one's mind, if I'm thinking, gosh, I'm really not clear or sure what's going on or how to meditate, having any kind of question or lack of clarity, simply return to the fact that consciousness still is ever present, regardless of what the mental understanding or lack of is.
It's a place to start, but not a final resolve. What is indicated here is more expansive. You say, there is still consciousness. Is there a you apart from that consciousness to experience or undergo the trouble, the problem, the lack of clarity? If there is, then the inquiry should be focused right there on who he is. As long as that one seems to be a distinct individual with whatever attributes, however many attributes, in whatever way they may appear, as long as that individual is assumed to exist, there will still be trouble. The samsara will sprout out from there. If we inquire to know the nature of that I, the I-ness of that I will vanish. The individuality of it will vanish because it's unreal. And every idea, every defining limitation or limited definition appended to that idea of I will vanish with it. Then what you conclusively realize is that you are only consciousness and nothing but that. There is no separate realizer of this. The consciousness knows itself. And being infinite and eternal, it alone exists. and it alone knows itself. In that, the possibility of confusion, lack of clarity, the consequent bondage or suffering, that possibility becomes impossible. And thereby your freedom and peace, which are actually innate, become, as it were, complete. Is it clear what's being pointed out? Verse 43. Whatever beings there may be, and however many of them there may be, whatever is spoken, whenever, and whatever and however much is said by the Vedas, all are only consciousness indeed. He's put a lot into this one verse. Look at it phrase by phrase. Whatever beings there may be, and however many of them there may be. What makes up a being? And why does one think that there are many of them? If we consider a being to be defined by the body, then there is a multiplicity of them. We are not actually determining a multiplicity of beings. We are merely sensorially perceiving a multiplicity of bodies. But is a being a body? Your idea of other beings conforms to the idea of yourself. Are you a body? Are you a body, or is the body merely an experience of which you are aware? And that which is so aware must necessarily be transcendent of the body. What constitutes your being? Who am I? That is the quintessential question.
Thank you, Master. I was noticing that, if I kind of destroy thoughts as they arise, what you're saying about how everything is consciousness, kind of becomes clear, and that my link with the body is, instead of just being consciousness, is when I let thoughts go and take them to be who I am, the identity that comes with those thoughts. And as I was destroying the thoughts, the very blissful unitary.
How are you setting about destroying them?
I guess with the intention to destroy them.
All right. The intention must be there. There must be the desire to see beyond them. But how does the actual destruction occur?
eliminating them from, because here the consciousness has kind of been opened up, so for lack of a better word, I'm perceiving it. I know it's not sight, but like.
All right. It's understood. But what brings about the destruction of those thought forms that you want to get beyond?
I don't know.
Because if we merely get them to calm down and disappear, they may very well reappear. Perhaps that's happened to you
Yes.
more than once.
Lots.
So destruction or transcendence of the mind must be something else.
What is it?
It has everything to do with what you regard as your identity.
Regarding myself like as this person that I take myself to be.
The person is constituted of ever so many thought patterns. What is the identity that's wrapped up in these thoughts?
Do you mean the actual person or like the consciousness itself?
Find out. What is actually your being? Even if you regard yourself to start with as an individual living being, what constitutes that being? What is your real nature?
I guess since, as you said, and we're reading, there's only consciousness. Even the illusory individual and the thoughts can only be the same consciousness.
Yes, but if we maintain the belief in the individual and his confounding thoughts and say they're consciousness, but we still retain them, we haven't gained much, we've only renamed the same old perplexing ignorance. The aim should be not to rename the illusion, but to be free of illusion entirely. For in this way one gains happiness that's permanent and destroys the very root of suffering.
In a way, it's like they so never existed that you can't even talk about what they were or what they are now. Like.
That's true. When you're truly free, even of a particular tendency, let alone the whole of them, you can no longer reconstruct it. It becomes absurd or impossible to do so.
What's the difference between, I guess, that and then like just repression of like.
A repressed thought will come back sooner or later, if not in the same form, then in a different form, because the same misidentification which lies at its root will still apparently be there. So the inquiry rather focuses on your nature, your existence, your very consciousness. Discriminate what is merely what you think about, even if you're accustomed to thinking you're in it or identified with it. What is merely just thought about, and what are you truly? If a person proceeds in this way wisely, he turns out not to be a person at all.
But just
He finds his nature to be vast, illimitable, and eternal consciousness. And not a trace of the limited person or individual is in that at all. The very root cause of those perplexing thoughts is actually absent.
beautiful.
And it's within you. Whatever beings there may be, and however many of them there may be, how many living beings are there? Throughout all time. Here and elsewhere in this local universe. How many beings are there? Consider those that you see or can imagine, and those that are, as he said, far out of reach, unimaginable. Not seen with your senses, not even thought of in your mind. How many beings are there? All those beings have only one self. They are thus truly not many at all. They are only one self of the nature of pure consciousness. If you understand this deeply, you find yourself to be the self that dwells as the very being of all. You are not one being attempting to communicate with another being. Rather, your nature is the innermost consciousness. Innermost in the sense of being non-objective. And thus you are the self of all. Whatever beings there may be, and however many of them there may be, whatever is spoken, whenever, and whatever and however much is said by the Vedas, all are only consciousness indeed. Language may be said to be consisting of distinctions. With all those distinctions, indicated by the words for those differences, making up the substance of all those distinctions, whether expressed or left unexpressed. The only substance there is this one consciousness. The message of the Vedas may be said to be otherwise. It is not based on distinctions, but its purpose is the elucidation of the differenceless reality. Whether it is the differences or the absolute oneness, it is all just the very same consciousness. The same consciousness which is your very being and the being of all. Again, do not mistake yourself to be a body. If you misidentify with the body, all of what Ribhu is making clear will seem incomprehensible. If you cease to misidentify with the body, what he is saying about consciousness earlier, about Brahman, the self, is self-evident truth. Whatever beings there may be, that includes you. And however many of them there may be, that includes the one called you. Whatever is spoken, and by implication, whatever you've conceived, whenever, past, present, and future, during this life or during any other time. And whatever and however much is said by the Vedas, both things that are said only once in the Veda and that which is repeated multiple times. The message and the expression, all of it, is only consciousness. Have you ever experienced anything outside of consciousness? Whatever is experienced or known in consciousness must be of the very nature of the consciousness. And it is only overlooking one's identity as consciousness and supposing oneself to be some kind of thing that makes everything else seem as if objective, distinct from or outside of consciousness. Turn your vision inward. Abandon the misidentification with the body and with thought, inquiring into the very significance of I. And find consciousness. Consciousness knows itself. Meditate and know in this fashion. And then say if there is a multiplicity of beings, things, meanings, etc. Verse 44. There is no bondage, but only consciousness. There is then no liberation, but only consciousness. Just consciousness is the only reality. This is the truth, I say in the name of Shiva. I say in the name of Shiva, Sprashe could mean, I say this touching Shiva, holding Shiva. I give this holding Shiva, or even I attain Shiva. Anything along these lines would be perfectly fine translation. What is it that he says, holding to Shiva, describing Shiva himself? The truth. What is the truth? What is reality? The sensations do not tell us the truth. What is the truth? The thoughts of the mind don't capture the truth. What is the truth? The truth must necessarily refer to what actually exists. What is it that is real? What actually exists? He keeps saying consciousness, consciousness. Apply it to your own experience. Inquire. What is the nature of your very consciousness? What is the nature of your existence? He says there is no bondage, but only consciousness. If you take yourself to be something other than consciousness, you superimpose, through imagination only, limitation upon yourself. And this constitutes bondage. That is, the misidentification constitutes bondage. Misidentification is merely ignorance. It's not the truth. It's not what really exists. Misidentification is merely ignorance. And ignorance alone constitutes bondage. Now Ribhu says, there is no bondage, but only consciousness. Bondage must be for someone who is other than consciousness. Are you other than consciousness? And if you suppose so, even to the least degree, the consciousness which is infinite and eternal is one thing, and you are somehow another, somehow removed from it, somehow distinct from it, as a particle apart from it or in it or some such thing. If you imagine in such a way, there appears to be bondage where in truth there is none. If you are a body or embodied, there is every possibility of bondage. Are you the body? If you are the mind, there can be bondage. The mind seems to become entangled in itself. Yet are you the mind? Do the body and the mind exist even apart from the consciousness which knows them? That which knows them is not to be defined in terms of that which is objective, bodily attributes, mental attributes. If you are not the body and not the mind, if you're not anything sensorially perceived, and not anything conceived or imagined in the mind, what remains of your consciousness? It is something without beginning or end, self-luminous, ever existent. It is not bound. Upon inquiry to know oneself, even inquiring who is bound, bondage proves non-existent. And you discover that what was there the entire time was only the one undifferentiated, infinite consciousness. That alone is what you are, and that alone is your only state. Now, if you've never been bound, there is then no liberation, but only consciousness. From the position, the pseudo-position of being someone who is bound, you naturally desire a state of freedom. If you're unhappy, you desire happiness. And considering bondage a state in which you become entangled, you then strive for liberation, which is good. Yet liberation will be considered another state. The individual is bound, and the individual will hopefully enter a state of liberation. But self-knowledge destroys the false assumption of the individual. There is no one bound. And so then there is no one who is then liberated. Liberation is freedom from the idea of that one. Thus it is timeless and beyond the consideration of loss and attainment. Since the state of bondage does not really exist, what is referred to as the state of liberation is not a state at all, but the very nature of your being, the very nature of your consciousness. When you arrive at blissful liberation, you arrive not at a state, but you arrive, so to speak, at yourself. There is no bondage, but only consciousness. There is then no liberation, but only consciousness.
So then, like when you tell me, when you've told me, I've heard you say before that to view bondage as objectively created, like it happens because of the world, or because of my body, or because of something outside of me, and to place myself as a victim to it. You're saying, I've heard you tell me that's a very inverted viewpoint. But lately, I don't know if this is correct or not, but lately it's been starting to seem that more so, instead of going around and saying, okay, this experience is causing me to suffer, my body is starting to cause me to suffer, or these people are starting to cause me to suffer. It's been starting to seem that the reason why like it's more so like a projection of the tendencies in my mind.
That's correct.
So if I see it as like a projection of the tendency in my mind, then I feel like I stop looking into the world or looking to my...
That's right. If we, as spiritual beings, blame the world for our suffering, that's still a worldly standpoint, isn't it? Isn't that what makes up worldliness? The world is the cause of the problem. If we say the world conditions us, that's a worldly perspective. Even if we give new spiritual terms to it, it's still a worldly perspective. When we see that, or when we have that idea, then we will consider freedom or liberation as also coming to us externally. If our suffering is caused externally, then our happiness must come from an external source. If our bondage is created by other things, then someone or something else is going to create our liberation. That will be the idea. It's fraught with dualism, and it doesn't work. However, if we see, my own mind creates this ignorance, my own mind projects the suffering, then if you yourself appear as the cause of bondage, then you yourself must be the cause of your own liberation. When a man sees that all of his suffering, all of his bondage, is self-created, he's then in a position to destroy the very cause of that bondage.
So then, does that even go towards judging anything or having an opinion about anything? Is that really just my tendency? I'm viewing something based off my own egoic tendency, and I'm blaming it on that thing.
So then how valid are your opinions? Consider the entirety of the samsara as just an overblown opinion. Not the truth, just an opinion.
Then would that even go down to the standpoint of, okay, I'm afraid of issues with my body, or I'm afraid of things happening to my body?
What's the cause of the fear? That a body is in a precarious position in life, that death and illness, etc., are inevitable. This is obvious. But what causes the fear? If you tie together your identity with the body, you'll be frightened. That's why again and again in the Maharshi's instruction there's such emphasis on finding out, are we bodies? Who am I? The body does not cause bondage or suffering, regardless of its state or condition. But misidentification with the body causes all kinds of suffering. The body, state, or condition you may or may not be able to do something about. But knowledge of yourself and the abandonment of misidentification, the destruction of ignorance, that's totally in your hands. And one who knows himself, bodiless and egoless, has found blissful immortality. Ribhu continues, just consciousness is the only reality. This sums up all the previous instruction and all the previous verses. Just consciousness is the only reality. Consciousness plus the notion I is illusion. Consciousness plus the notion of a this is an illusion. Consciousness plus anything is an illusion. Just consciousness, as it is, as it ought to be realized to be, that is the reality.
If thoughts about ourselves and thoughts about others are entirely illusory and worthless, the conceiver of those must be entirely illusory. But it seems that this conceiver keeps having us identify with this body as an individual person. So how do I attack the conceiver and just cut the root? I just want to get the root and entirely eliminate the conceiver.
Question him thoroughly. The conceiver who is at the root of all the misconceptions has no substance. It's like a mere shadow. Now, if you take a lamp, bright light, and go to inspect a shadow, what happens?
Shadow disappears.
The questioning that is intense, one-pointed inquiry to know oneself is that light. A temporary insight is good, but won't suffice for what you're aiming for. Inquiry should be deep, thorough, and continuous. Consciousness, just consciousness, is the only reality. This is the truth, I say in the name of Shiva. All that is said by the three Vedas is only consciousness indeed. We may take it as all the Vedas. Sometimes only the first three Vedas and Atharva is not counted as a Veda in some scriptures, especially much older books. And Shiva Rahasyam, which this text is nested in, is a very ancient work. All that is said by the three Vedas is only consciousness indeed. This was said to Kumara, another name for Skanda, by Shiva, and this has been told to you. Whoever hears this even once, he himself becomes Brahman. If you really, truly hear, actually listen to what Ribhu is expounding, if you truly listen even once, there is the realization of Brahman. You abide as Brahman. To inquire as you listen is to truly hear. Whoever hears this even once, he himself becomes Brahman. If you think you are something different, you haven't quite heard it yet. You may be on the way to hearing it, but you haven't heard it yet. When you truly hear this, really hear this, understanding what it says, you become Brahman and none else. Sutta said, "Internally I shall perform worship to the one whose body is space, by Ishavasya and other mantras. It's the beginning of the Ishavasya Upanishad, the mantra, meaning the Lord who dwells, or indwells the Lord. By offering a seat and garments in praise, offering worship to the Ishana Lingam. Ishana is another name for Shiva. Should be taken to mean Shiva Lingam. For the Supreme One, the Great, who is established in the midst of the primal cosmos, anointing one who cannot be wedded, offering garments to one who is clothed in space, offering sweet-smelling flowers to the one who is without nose or smell or form or appearance, offering lamps to the one who is self-illumined, offering naivedya, consecrated cooked food, to one who is the ever-satisfied, all-devourer, with circumambulations and prostrations to the one who strides over the worlds. In this my authority is indeed the crest of the Vedas. In a single verse he has summed up the entire Nirguna Manasa Puja, the worship of the attributeless one within in the mind. It is also a way of understanding deeply what occurs through the play of outward symbols in a puja. To the physical eye, an outer puja appears to be a set of actions and offerings, etc. To the inner eye, it is as he has described. Those who know not offer worship by means of an endless parade of symbolism and with a mind set on rituals. Those who know, however, worship inwardly, in abstract meditation, their minds attuned to the prescribed injunctions. Yet Ishvara, the Lord, though continuing to confuse the world, takes into his abode all who worship with various bhavas, various feelings or attitudes or sentiments, and makes them transcendent in knowledge. So whether one worships outwardly, inwardly, or both, what happens? The Lord, though continuing to confuse the world, the Lord alone is the power in all illusion, just as the Lord alone is the power in all wisdom. As long as we think we are in the world, we are confused about the nature of the Lord. When once we abandon the I and the world, the Lord is self-evident, none other than the self. Yet Ishvara, though continuing to confuse the world, takes into his abode all who worship with various bhavas, outwardly or inwardly or both, and makes them transcendent in knowledge. That is the purpose, that is the supreme goal. That is what should be meditated on. The transcendent knowledge. This is what Ribhu reveals. It's not like any other kind of knowledge. The transcendent knowledge is of the nature of the very same consciousness he's been revealing all along. Om Namah Shivaya. Shanti.